Welcome to the Bridge Podcast. I'm your host, John Lamberton. Today, I'm speaking with Andy Schecter. Andy is somebody who has seriously impacted the coffee industry and the barista community in general. He was a prolific poster on forums like Alt Coffee and Home Barista or Coffeed, and this established him as a central node in a network of really smart, empirically minded tinkerers of that era. Andy was one of the first people to really make headway on espresso machine temperature stability by installing a PID on his home machine, and he also changed the way we think about espresso and how we talk about it. Andy's also the owner of a tofu company, which is something I'm interested in, so we chatted a little bit about that as well. After some initial audio issues, we decided to just restart the interview for the sake of audio quality, and it's also worth mentioning that we recorded this as Biden passed 270 electoral votes, so you might hear cars honking their horns in the background or general hooting and hollering from my fellow Angelinos. Anyway, it was a pleasure speaking with Andy, and I hope that y'all enjoy our chat as much as I did. All right.
This is called a do-over?
Yeah, indeed. All right, so I'm here with Andy Schecter, and we are hopefully now post audio problems. And so, Andy, I was just curious. I see an EK43 behind you and a VersaLab grinder, and so I'm hoping to hear a little bit about what type of coffee you're brewing. I know that you're using George Howell all of the time, and we talked a little bit about this, but just for the audience to hear, can you go over some of this again?
Sure. I'm probably 95% espresso. Okay. So in the morning, I make a few espressos for myself and my girlfriend, and since I got I had actually met John Bicht, who is the inventor of VersaLab, of the VersaLab grinder. I actually met him at a coffee show. I don't know, back in 2000, back in the aughts, in the early 2000s, I guess. And we had great conversations. I was fascinated by the guy and what he was doing. And I kind of talked about him, and he kind of, and we had such nice conversations that when he started selling the VersaLab grinders, he awarded me serial number 1 of the VersaLab grinders.
Nice.
So, but the VersaLab had some problems with maintaining the burr alignment. So it just sat around, and I didn't use it for years and years. Okay. And when I got the EK43, I was using that pretty much exclusively. But then finally, Frank Dura in Germany encouraged me to send my VersaLab grinder to him, and he refurbished it, put in 2 new bearings, changed the drive system. He sort of rebuilt the whole thing and put a fancy, some kind of high-tech chrome-looking finish on it, and returned it to me. So I've had it back for several months, and that's what I use for espresso pretty much exclusively. Okay. So when I make espresso in the morning, since I have high cholesterol and I'm concerned about that, and since espresso oils or coffee oils that are not filtered through paper supposedly can raise your cholesterol levels, for years, I've been putting a moistened filter disc. It's actually an AeroPress filter disc on the bottom before I put the coffee into the filter basket. And I think you lose a little bit of flavor from the coffee oils when you do that, because the paper filter is absorbing them. You gain for undecided reasons, for reasons that are really unknown to me, although I have theories, people have theories, you actually increase the extraction yield in any particular shot. And the difference is somewhere like 1%, 1.5%, something like that. That was kind of a really surprising thing to find out when I started doing that. Subsequently, Scott Rao said if you put a filter disc on top of the coffee after you tamp it, your yield even goes up a little higher. So I do both those. I have a paper below and a paper above, and it's very time consuming. And I once posted a video of my coffee technique, which hasn't changed that much. And some guy in a cafe somewhere just said nobody who knew what they were doing would ever do this because it's just a waste of time or something like that. And he's right. I don't know what I'm doing. So, but I do it anyway. Um, so that's my grinder, and I use the VST filter baskets, of course, and I was using a friend of mine, Clinton, gave me this this coffee grooming tool, okay, which you drop on top of the coffee in the filter basket and you spin it and it perfectly levels the coffee and actually tamps it too if you set it properly, compresses it, and that gives you beautiful looking shots. It gives you that perfect, whatever you call that kind of cone that curves down. It gives you perfect looking shots. But I found that um, my extraction yield decreased dramatically, like maybe 2% less using that grooming tool than not using the grooming tool. So if you want to, I decided if I wanted to take videos of my or just still shots of my extraction through a bottomless portafilter, and I wanted to impress people on how awesome my barista technique was, then I would use the grooming tool. But if I actually wanted to drink the shots, or if I was serving shots to friends, then it would be better not to use the grooming tool. So that's pretty much retired because I don't do too many awesome shots of extraction.
Mm-hmm.
The espresso machine I'm using is a Speedster, which is, Speedster's sitting over there, and I love the Speedster. I've had it for a long time, and I just enjoy the look of it on the counter, and I can do nice pre-infusions with it, line pressure pre-infusions, and I've been tempted, and probably eventually I will get a decent espresso machine because Decent seems like a really good company, more than decent. They seem like a great company. Mm-hmm. And Scott Rao, he's posted a lot of stuff on all the different things you can do with that decent machine and all the great extraction kind of experiments you could do. But I've been hesitant to do that because I just hate to, because I'm afraid that I would then stop using the Speedster entirely. And I love using the Speedster so much that it's kind of like I don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. And screw things up. So I am using the Speedster exclusively. Every once in a while, like in the middle of the day, I will make some drip coffee with a Technivorm, okay, and the Technivorm makes really nice drip coffee. But mostly I'm doing espresso. I actually quit doing cappuccinos a couple of years ago. The past couple of years, I've made probably 4 cappuccinos or something like that. Mostly when people come over, and so I was, I kind of got okay at doing latte art, and I think now I'm pretty terrible. I'm terrible at doing latte art. So, but every once in a long while, like a couple times a year, it's fun to get some milk and try to pour a Rosetta. Mm-hmm. And the coffee I use, I really like George Howe's coffees. I find they're light roasted, which I appreciate. I really like light roast, and I find they're just super clean. Okay. And when I taste a lot of other coffees, they might have some interesting flavors going on, but oftentimes they kind of taste dirty to me. So I think I've been spoiled by however, whoever's doing the prep, whatever farms or washing stations, whatever that George has found to prep his coffees, they seem to be doing a superb job. So so I probably I experiment with other things, but probably 75% of the coffee I drink is George Hell coffee. So um, that's kind. So that's I guess that sort of describes where I'm at.
Mhm.
Espresso, coffee wise, right now. I used to be. I've really backed off. In the back 5, 10, especially 10 years ago, I was constantly experimenting and exploring things and testing things and doing experiments and writing them up online, all that kind of stuff. And John, I backed way off. I've sort of like receded into the shadows
Mhm.
and turned to the coffee scene. So I really I enjoy my espresso making. And although it's frustrating sometimes because I'm just not the great barista that I would like to be, but but um, but I mess around with a refractometer and I try things, but I'm not like up on. Sometimes I go online and I read stuff that people are talking about, like Barista Hustle, what they're talking about, or what Scott Rayo's talking about, and I'm not up on. I'm really not up on all the latest kind of stuff. I think I'm stuck at about 2014 or something like that. And but 2014 in a lot of ways was better times than we have now. So
Mhm.
I can't complain about that, right? 2020 hasn't exactly been the greatest.
Yeah, I recall the era when I first started playing with a refractometer, and that was during the days when there was such a like being a barista is being an artist, and like I don't use scales because of this and that, and it's changed a lot since then, but I always was frustrated by that. So I saw this video that you did of using the speedster and the EK, and I think everybody's favorite part of the video is when you pull out this little clipboard, like this rollout clipboard, and you jot down all the data. And so I'm curious, that's just amazing, first of all. But what is the like? I mean, I guess you've said that you've eased up on the data collection, but how many shots do you think you measure these days out of all the shots that you pull in terms of
Well,
TDS and all that?
I moved from that house. Okay, in that house, the machine was the speedster was on the counter, and there was a pull-out drawer which was designed to be a cutting board, I guess.
Hmm.
It wasn't even a drawer; it was just like a 3/4 inch slab of sort of like hard maple, and it slid into the counter, and it just pulled out. So I guess it was designed for chopping. But when I started doing the coffee thing, and you had a notebook there, and it was always in the way, and you have enough paraphernalia on the counter anyway.
Hmm.
And I said, oh, wait a minute, I can use that. I can use that to keep my notes. And then I came up with um, I sort of started recording data on this spreadsheet, and and I'm on like version. I think I started with letters of the alphabet, and I started with A, B, C, D. Each time I revised that little spreadsheet, I
Hmm.
think I'm up to like S or T or something like that. Okay, I kept on revising that thing, and so um, I still do that. I still keep all that data. Where is it? Oh, it's over here. So here's my espresso notebook, and it's still I got pages and pages and pages. So I still do it. I pretty much every day. I might not record every shot, but I probably put down 2 out of 3 shots because I have a terrible memory. And what I did yesterday, if I like the shots, I may not remember exactly what I did yesterday. So just this sheaf of papers goes back 4 years that are in the notebook now. But I have another old notebook that probably goes back, years before that. So so I am recording I am recording, my dose, my shot, ending volume. The if I measure with the refractometer, I record the TDS and the extraction yield, and I record like pre-infusion seconds. I record seconds till first drop out of the bottomless portafilter. I actually record when the stream coalesces to form a single stream out of the portafilter, and the final time. And then I have a space for flavor notes. And so I'm always writing stuff down in the morning as I'm doing that, but not nearly as thorough. And the experiments that I'm doing are not such formal experiments. But yeah, I know the most comments on that video, aside from that guy who said I was an idiot amateur and I didn't know, and nobody of any standing in the barista community would ever use those techniques. The thing that really people got turned on by that video was that little pull-out drawer because it was so slick. I don't have that pull-out drawer anymore. I really like this. I moved to a house, and I really love this house, this new house more than the old house. If I could bring one thing over from the old house, it'd be that little drawer.
I think I might have one of those little weird, like semi-functional cutting boards. So I'm gonna have to do some thinking about repurposing it.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So we were also talking about you beta testing with Vince Fideli on the refractometer and sort of like the moisture offsets and that type of thing. It's interesting. I remember when that app first came out, it seemed like everybody was always on the wrong setting, and like it would just take some know-how to like make sure that you had the moisture set to 0 and like you weren't on immersion when you're doing espresso or whatever. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing to hear about your experience with the refractometer. So I'm curious also. You were starting to talk about alt coffee or alt dot coffee, and I was wondering if you could sort of paint a picture of what that community of sort of smart people who are interested in coffee was like back then.
Alt coffee was really, really cool. Okay, and what the picture was like back then, like 20 years ago. I got on it like 20 years ago. Okay, just over 20 years ago. And there certainly were people on there before that, but I don't really know what went on. Alt coffee was like a fantastic. It was like a think tank. Okay, it was a fantastic little think tank, and we were struggling. Okay, everyone was struggling because I kind of said I think in just this conversation about how I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm just experimenting and trying to figure things out. Back then, we were in a deep dark hole wearing blindfolds. I don't really think anybody knew what they were doing about why espresso was coming out the way it was coming out. Okay. The theory of extraction yield, or the theory of how the taste varied with extraction yields, the concepts of trying to get as even an extraction as possible out of your coffee bed, these were totally unknowns. There just was no knowledge. There were baristas out there like Paul Bassett from Australia or Bronwyn Cerna from Seattle that were pretty good baristas, or maybe excellent baristas, and they might have had an intuitive feel for how to make espresso. But most of us had no clue. Mark Prince told me once that he had judged, I think he had judged the National Barista Championships, the U.S. Barista Championships, and he said the coffee tasted like shit, the espresso. They were all horrible. And these were the barista champions. Mm-hmm. I hope I got that right. If I didn't, I apologize to Mark for getting quotation wrong. But nobody, if there were people that knew how to make espresso really taste good, at least in the U.S., if there were any of those people, or people in the barista community, like on Australia, they were keeping it secret, okay, for their own benefit, okay. Um, the Italians certainly knew how to make good tasting espresso, but their espresso was a very, a very different style, okay, and
Mhm.
it wasn't our style, or maybe we could have benefited by just emulating their style, but we were kind of doing our own thing. So what alt coffee was a bunch of people who were kind of really psyched up to try and make decent espresso, and we're not having a whole lot of success. And we were trying to figure it out, okay. And what was amazing about it is, I guess for like the first time in history, people in the US and Australia and Europe, and everywhere else could collaborate, could collaborate pretty much instantaneously and talk about what they had tried, what worked and what didn't work, instead of being, isolated in your own little community. So, um, old coffee in later years degenerated, and people just started coming on and posting all kinds of like hate racist stuff, and it became absolutely an awful place. And I don't know, Google, I don't know if Google, I think they shut it down completely. um,
Interesting.
but alt coffee was unmoderated, so anybody could come in there and post. And but for quite a few years, it was really a neat place. Um, and I met online, people like Jim Schulman, who was a brilliant guy and a really good coffee taster, and just had all kinds of great insights. And Jim and I, collaborated on some things. Um, and a lot of other people that, there was a fellow named from New Zealand, named, if I got it right, Rene Van Sint Anneland.
Hmm.
And Rene was the first guy that I knew of who said, you shouldn't be measuring the output of your espresso volumetrically. Okay. So he said, forget about ounces, or forget about measuring it in milliliters. Okay. Because the amount of crema varied. He said, you should be measuring it in grams. And that was the first time I had heard that. So I started doing that, and I started talking that up. That wasn't my idea. That I got that from Renee. But this was the kind of thing that some guy in a cafe in New Zealand, he was doing, and then you would learn about it on alt.coffee. Um, there was a guy named David Ross who's I think he's a math professor or something, out in Hawaii or something like that. And he said, if you have trouble with static on your grinder, take a drop of water and put a drop of water on your coffee beans before you grind them. Okay. And I tried that, and the static vanished. Okay. That's really like for single dosing of coffee grind. That's a lot harder to do if you have a hopper full of coffee. But that was like a miracle thing. And that came up on 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 alt.coffee. So I think I'm kind of an old guy, right? But but the way I look at it is that baristas today, young baristas today, this is this is kind of this is kind of an old guy talking. Um, Baristas today have no idea, how fast things have moved along. They have no idea how pitiful the barista knowledge was 20 years ago. Okay, and
Mhm.
they have no idea how many people have worked, sometimes on their own, in small groups, or in collaborations online. Baristas nowadays have no idea how much work has, and discussion and experimentation has gone into where we're at today. Okay, so if
Mhm.
you become a barista today, and you have some kind of decent training, there is a huge amount of knowledge that will be imparted to you that just did not exist, 20 years ago. Or if it did exist, it was kept proprietary, it was kept secret, you know. I always assumed that people like Ely in Italy, they knew how to make espresso taste the way they wanted to make it taste, but you know, the knowledge really was not out there. Okay. And so then, but then alt.coffee was text-based and it had a lot of limitations and it was unmoderated. So there'd be, you know, trolls and stuff like that that would be on there. And so Mark Prince started Coffee Geek. That was his sort of spin-off where he could moderate it and he could control the content, and it became his website. Dan Keene came up with Home Barista, and it was the same thing where, you know, he could control the content and moderate it. And especially Home Barista became a great place for me because a lot of the more scientific engineering kind of people migrated over to Home Barista. And, you know, we did a whole lot of experimentation and pooling of data and prodding each other on and discussions and stuff like that. And, you know, that it was just really invaluable. It was really invaluable. You know, so, you know, I was mostly over there, and Greg Skase was over there, you know, doing his thing, and Jim Schulman was over doing his thing, and all of us were on Home Barista. Okay. And, you know, I think, and there was another one called Coffeed, COFEED, coffee.com. And Coffeed was great because it was kind of a lot of professional people, okay, that had a little bit more experience, and they kind of restricted access to it. And so it was a little more exclusive. And but there was it was a different crowd there, so it was great input. And Scott Rayos started what to me was the best coffee thread in history. Okay,
is this the Chemex thing?
Yeah, the title of his thread is why I hate the Chemex. Okay, and oh, that was a great thread, but some people were up in arms, like Peter Giuliano.
Yep.
You know, he's, how could you hate the Chem? I love the Chemex, and it was great because Scott couldn't have picked a title that would get people more excited.
Yeah.
But there was some really good discussion that went on in among people getting upset or just laughing or just whatever, or countering Scott's arguments. There was a lot of good information that changed hands. So Coffee was really good, but then Coffee sort of ended, as I remember, kind of abruptly. But the whole online thing was, to me, just absolutely remarkable, and made our whole espresso journey, you know, 100 times easier than it would have been otherwise. I probably would have given up if it wasn't for, if it wasn't for all the collaborations that went on online back in those days.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have gotten into coffee when, you know, scales were already sort of a thing, and you know, like the refractometer wasn't in popular use yet, but like I was able to pull it out of the box that was up on a shelf somewhere hidden away at Intelligentsia, and so I pulled it out and was like, I'm gonna use this. So I mean, it was nice to have that head start that you and the others on those forums provided.
You started at Intelli?
That was my second coffee job. Yeah.
Okay, which one? Where about, in LA?
Yeah, in the Silver Lake location.
Okay, yeah. I was at Intelli again back in the aughts somewhere, and I actually asked Doug if I could get a barista class, and I actually had a barista class, a 1-on-1 or a 2-on-1 barista class with Matt Riddle and Amber Sather, and so I was in Chicago, and
This is with you teaching, or
That was they were, I went there and I said, I want to, can you give me a barista class? Because I want to be a better barista.
oh, I see.
So Matt Riddle, he had won the USBC, and Amber was just a great barista. So, and they were at Intelli. So, so I spent like a few hours with them, pulling espresso and talking about, how to make better espresso. And that was a great time. That was a really great time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you, I feel like you have a reputation for being the person that brought PIDs into play, and I'm curious, like, there's definitely been an impact on the professional sector from the home barista community, and I assume, vice versa. Can you speak to that at all in terms of like the impact from the home community to the professional world, and vice versa?
Hmm. I think if an industry, well, I'm not a historian, but I think if an industry, some kind of human endeavor, okay, there's a certain point in its lifetime where the technology is pretty undeveloped, is
Mm,
relatively undeveloped, okay, and so there's a point in time in the development of that technology where amateurs can do very significant work, okay, and make a very significant contribution because this art or technology or whatever it is relatively undeveloped, okay, and so in my mind that's where coffee was when I got into it. That's where coffee was, at least in the outside of like, well, I don't know where I was at, where I was at. I was in the US, and coffee shops, new wave, third wave coffee shops or whatever were popping up and opening up. And at that point, the the understanding, again, what I was said before, the understanding of how to make espresso and the science behind espresso and the art behind espresso was relatively undeveloped. So amateurs could make contributions just as well as the pros could. And back then, if you were a professional barista, you had a line of people out the door, and you worked a long shift, and you did the best you could to keep up with it and not end up with carpal tunnel syndrome and everything else.
mhm.
And you probably um, didn't have a whole lot of time to worry about the theory of extraction yields or something like that. Okay, and and you might not have any kind of technical training, so all that kind of stuff it was an art, and the science part, you may have had no knowledge about. So if there were amateurs that could make a contribution to coffee knowledge, it was people that had some kind of technical background, because we didn't have the experience that the pros had. We weren't making hundreds of shots a day. We were
Mhm.
making a handful a day and getting so blasted on caffeine tasting that then we had to go to sleep or something like that. But we could spend the time pondering things, and we had the luxury of doing experimentations. So 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 that's where I think like the alt coffee people and the home barista people made their contribution. It was because the science was so undeveloped. Okay, nowadays, I think it's different because I see some of the stuff that the more technical people and the engineering people and the scientific community is doing, and this stuff is very ambitious and very complex, and sometimes all kinds of computational models and all kinds of stuff like that, and it's beyond the scope of anything that I ever did or could imagine doing. um, and so um, but back then, we were able to make a contribution, and we really appreciated the knowledge that the pros could give us, but I think at least some of the pros appreciated some of the experiments and some of the insights that we brought to the game. So you know, it was a cool time to be involved in something where you felt like you could really learn stuff, and you could really discover stuff that people hadn't thought about before, or they hadn't discovered before. And then through the internet, you could offer it to everybody and have them tear you down. Or else not tear you down, or else it became useful for them.
So I guess you also own a tofu company, and I was reading about the PID story, and how you were using PIDs to make tofu. Is your background like scientific at all, or is it just your background is tofu?
Well, I was always very interested in math and science, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I went to college. I went to University of Michigan, and I got a degree in conservation, in ecology, conservation ecology, I guess you'd say, okay? But I had a really great time in college, but I never used that degree. We used to, on the University of Michigan campus, on one corner of the main campus, you walk under this archway, which was the engineering building, okay? And we used to walk under that engineering building and just kind of shake our heads and go, man, those nerds there, what the hell do they know? And so that's how I kind of became an engineer, okay? Because sometimes it works. Like, supposedly, someone told me that Gandhi once said, you become what you hate. He said that. And it's kind of like, if you really hate something with a passion, it really means you have some kind of attraction to it. I mean, it resonates. It might resonate negatively in your psyche, but you've got some kind of connection to that thing. And it's not unusual. Because you have that connection, it's not unusual for you to become that thing that you hate so much. Now, I don't know that I really hated engineers, but I did put them down for being so nerdy or something like that, or so narrowly focused. But that's who I am. I am kind of a narrowly focused nerd. So when I got into making tofu, which was also a kind of thing where there were some basic instructions put out back in the 70s that that were woefully incomplete. And if you kind of did everything according to the instructions, you'd get really, really frustrated. Everything would come out horribly. So back then, a bunch of us started making tofu, and we were the first, some of the first, non-Asian people to be making tofu. The Chinese and Japanese, they in Chinatowns around the U.S., they'd been making tofu for, I don't know, many, many years. But we were like hippies trying to learn how to make tofu, because that's what hippies were eating back then. And okay, so one of the things was cooking properly, cooking the soy milk properly. And one of the industrial suppliers sold us a PID temperature controller, okay? And that was back in, I don't know, 1997 or something like that. And so I learned about that technology. And then later on, when I got into coffee, in 1999 and 2000, David Schomer was talking about the importance of temperature control. And he was saying that he had done all these modifications to his La Marzocco linea, but he still had like a 2-degree variation in his boiler temperature. And well, I actually emailed him and I said, well, have you tried a PID temperature controller? Because I knew they would do a lot better. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, it's an industrial temperature controller. And then I described to him what I was doing. And I had bought a Sylvia from Whole Latte Love, okay, which is right near my house. And, a consumer espresso machine, a coffee machine dealer. And then I hooked up this PID temperature controller, and the boiler temperature just, became very, very steady. And I knew that if he was having a problem with the thermostat, mechanical thermostat in his Linea, that the PID temperature controller would solve the problem. Now, he said later that, I might have been among the first or one of the first. Greg Skase was doing the same thing at the same time, to talk about PID temperature controls in espresso. David had, I think he had John Bick from Versalab that was working on the problem for him, and he was putting he was about to put a PID temperature controller in, but it just was the way you do temperature control in an industrial setting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it costs a lot more. Nowadays they're kind of cheap, but back then a PID temperature controller was hundreds of dollars, and the little thermostat that they were using on espresso machines might have been $5. So there was a huge difference in cost. But if you cared about temperature control, then that's what you would use PID. And David obsessed about temperature control, to a degree that I can't figure out. Okay. But, David says he can taste, a 1/10 of a degree or 2/10 of a degree difference. And to me, it makes no sense. But I certainly can't taste it. I don't know anybody that can. But if he can, more power to him. And he was the one that inspired me to try and see and get that kind of accuracy. Otherwise, I don't think I would have bothered. I would have been interested in other aspects of espresso making. But anyways, but to answer your question in less than 2 hours, I was using PID temperature control, in my tofu factory, and it was pretty easy to take a spare controller and put it on the Rancilio Silvia and get that boiler to kind of steady out in temperature.
Cool. Awesome. I'm also I'm a vegan that loves tofu, and I'm maybe as interested in your tofu experiences and your coffee experience. And so I'm wondering what are the best tofus that you've ever had?
Well, my tofu, of course.
You do mainly firm and extra firm, right, with soy boy?
Yeah. We're kind of there are artisan tofu people out there that strive to make the greatest tasting or the most lovely textured tofu possible. Mm-hmm. Okay. And whether they do or not, I don't know, because I haven't tasted that many. Okay. But my company, Soy Boy, we're sort of more like an industrial supplier. We're sort of like if you have a restaurant, okay, or you're a Cornell University or something like that, and you have to feed, you have to make, 75 vegan meals an evening or something like that, and you want a source of tofu, then that's our market. And so I don't go around, we're sort of like grinding it out, mm-hmm. 2,000 pounds an hour. Okay. Wow. Whereas the artisan tofu people are going at a much, much slower rate. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so in coffee, my taste in coffee, maybe, I talked about George Howe, and so my tastes in coffee are very much, freakishly artisan, I guess you would say. Okay. But my taste in tofu is more like, we're an institutional supplier, and there's no chef at Cornell University that's ever come back and said, the subtle sweetness, when you changed from the 2018 crop to the 2019 crop, I noticed that The
Hmm.
traces of grassiness were no longer present, and no one's ever said that. So, it's an interesting question that you ask. What's the best tofu you ever had? But um, I'm not I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what the answer is. Okay,
I
okay.
think
I love tofu. I eat tofu every day, and I season it all kinds of different ways. And the tofu that we make is firm, extra firm, holds together really well. It's got a lot of protein packed in there. It slices well, fries up well, all that kind of stuff. That's what our selling. That's why people like our tofu and also our tempeh. We make a lot of tempeh too. Um, um, but that's the only way I can answer your question.
uh, I we got it like an artisanal tofu a few years ago, and I was really excited about it, and I ended up just botching the cooking. So it's kind of funny. I think I have similar tastes where it's a little bit more utilitarian. Like I buy reasonably good tofu and try to cook it without fucking it up. Uh, but I'm also curious. So Charles Babinski, who is another coffee guy who's really into making tofu at home. We both went through phases of like making tofu at home, and I'm wondering, do you think that there's any reason for somebody to make tofu at home other than just like it being a hobby? Like to compare it to manual brewing, I guess. Like, is there any benefit to be had from doing it yourself on a small scale?
You like the feeling of burning your hands?
I don't.
Um, um, maybe in the time of COVID, maybe there's a reason to make your tofu at home because it gives you something to do. If you're stuck at home and you're kind of bored out of your mind.
Mhm.
Um, but when we started out, we essentially made tofu on a home scale. A lot to try and figure out how to make it work. And what struck me early on was, my God, the cleaning up after this thing is awful. I
Yeah.
mean, you have all these different cloths and implements and presses and everything that you got to clean. And when you boiled the soy slurry, in the first step, um, it would boil over. It would boil over all over your stove, and then it would burn onto your stove if you didn't pay attention to it for a few seconds.
Hmm.
So it was kind of an awful mess. And so I would answer no. I don't see, unless you're just looking for something to do. I mean, you can make homemade bread, um, and you can make fantastic homemade bread, and it's not that much of a hassle. Um, I suppose you can do, pickles and canned vegetables or, you know, stuff like that. And it's really not that big a deal. And the results can be superior to what you can buy. Um, but I'm very prejudiced because I'm a commercial tofu maker. But
Right.
no, I don't see, I don't, I just don't get it. I don't get it. Tofu is so cheap at retail, for what you're getting that, I think it's one thing you should buy. Prejudiced opinion.
I think that's sensible, and I mean, yeah, Charles loves doing it. I think because he loves like curing meat and this and that, but like he likes the hobby of it. But in my mind, I'm just like, yeah, the tofu press can sit in the pantry somewhere untouched for years. So to get back to coffee a little bit, so you were getting to like the alt coffee and coffee and all these different sort of communities. Um,
Yeah.
and I feel like there was a lot of innovation during that period. And I'm curious if you're aware of any sort of other like little pockets of innovating communities in coffee currently.
Currently,
Hmm.
um,
I mean, besides Scott Rayo,
well, is it Matt
Perger.
Perger? Perger?
I tried to verify that the other day, and then I only confused myself more. Yeah, yes, I think that.
Yeah, that guy. Um, from what I gather, he's done some really good work and is continuing to do it. And is trying to do the education, coffee education. in a very organized way. So that seems, that seems really significant. Um, um, like I said, I'm not that up on, the latest in coffee technology and stuff like that. I'm sort of like, I'm still like 15 years ago. That's that's kind of. I I remember going to some U.S. Barista Championship. I think it was in Seattle, and there was a coffee guy named Billy Wilson. Okay, and Billy was the first one I remember that made a good um, single origin espresso coffee. Okay, and he kind of blew our mind because back then there's another one of those things where coffee has come such a long way. The cat just figured out how to open the screen door and slip outside. Oh well, I hope it comes back later. Good job. His name is Macaroni, and he just pawed the screen door open and he squeezed through the little opening. Billy Wilson was the first one I remember that he was making single origin espresso, because before then coffee was all these blends. To make espresso coffee, you're supposed to take 3 parts Brazil and 2 parts Sumatra and 1 part Ethiopian or something like that, and blend them together. And that's what you're supposed to do to make an espresso blend. And Billy came to that USBC, and for his presentation, he was doing a single origin espresso. And we were like, whoa, whoa. How could you even dream of doing that? And well, I didn't taste it, but I think it was pretty damn good. Nowadays, does anybody raise an eyebrow that you're doing a single origin espresso? No, that's pretty much all that I ever drink, or all that I ever make. Back then it was like an extraordinary feat of. It was like somebody said, "Boy, that Billy, he's got balls to pull that one off." And not sure how I got off on that tangent.
Or just pockets of people innovating and who's innovating now. Another question that I had for you though, that comes from Kyle Glanville, is if you can talk about the Schecter.
By the way, I did meet Kyle at a coffee show, years ago. So shout out to Kyle. He's a good.
Yeah, he is one of the few people in the coffee world that I think is up on heroes and legends of the world from your day. He was asking about the machine that you collaborated with David Schummer on, I think for the 2006 SCAA, and I think it's the Schectomatic, right?
Okay. Yeah, Schectermatic was a goofy name.
Mm-hmm.
I think what Kyle was talking. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, what Kyle was talking about was after we worked on the temperature control thing, okay, or at least the temperature stability thing, making sure that your shot was pulling at the same temperature time after time after time. And it seemed like after a few years of both PID boiler control and also various kinds of physical plumbing, modifications and stuff like that, you could build a machine that would deliver a uniform shot temperature, whether it was sitting idle for 15 minutes or whether you pulled several shots in a row. Okay, that was an accomplishment. Then people started talking about pressure profiling. Okay, so pressure profiling was another sort of unexplored area, at least unexplored by the third wave tofu makers. I think lever machines do pressure profiling because lever machines are set up so that the extraction pressure does decline through the course of the extraction, and they also do a natural pre-infusion too, if you use them that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an alt.coffee friend named Sean Lennon, but not John Lennon's son, but same name. And and Sean is an engineer, like he builds robots, and he's really brilliant engineer. And I was talking to him about various strategies to do pressure control, and he suggested a certain kind of pump that could do it, and that made a lot of sense to me. So I built this in my basement. I built this pump that could pump at espresso pressures, like 9 bar, and but also could be profiled. So you could program in a profile, and you could start out at 5 bar and then go up to 9 bar, and then you could drop it down, gradually drop it down through the course of the shot. And that was, and so I talked to Kevin and Tomas from Gimme Coffee,
Mm-hmm.
okay, before that show, and said, hey, what if we hooked up this pump to one of the groups on your, I think it was a La Marzocco Linea that you're bringing to the show. And they said, yeah, let's go for it. And so coming to that show, we had an espresso machine that would do programmable pressure profiling. And there might have been some commercial machines out there that did that, but I don't know what they were. It was pretty unusual. It was pretty exotic technology.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty nifty. Oh, the other thing about it is it was almost completely silent because it ran on air pressure. And I had an air compressor that was under the counter that was extremely quiet. It was made for dental offices and stuff like that, where they blast your cavities out with compressed air. So it made almost no noise. So here was this espresso machine at the show that pulled these silent shots, and it was pretty cool, and with pressure profiling. And so I remember Kyle. Kyle was at that show, and he was kind of impressed that here was something that, again, it was something like amateurs were doing that, and it was a technology that wasn't available commercially. Mm-hmm. And so, very soon after that, that kind of technology was available. Pressure profiling, was available commercially. So that was a really fun time.
Awesome. Yeah, I got to work on a strata at Silver Lake Intelligentsia, and that was fun. But inevitably the paddle would break, and if you wanted to do the pressure profiling, it was you'd be taking an order and adjusting this paddle, and inevitably then the next barista comes on and you're you're screwed. But I sort of, they had that EP, the Strata EP, which you could actually program, but I only got to mess with that for a day before they hid it away. But man, yeah, I too covet a decent, so hopefully we'll both be decent espresso makers soon. And incidentally, I'm interviewing John Buckman from Decent later this week, so that'll be interesting.
Cool. I've never met him. I've never had a conversation with him, but I read his stuff, and he just sounds like a really brilliant guy, and is doing great things. So I'm looking forward to seeing that podcast. Yeah.
I'll definitely send it your way. Let's see here. What else do I have on my agenda?
To me, the one thing that the most significant thing I've done in coffee,
mm-hmm.
okay, is with espresso brewing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back in those dark early days, they and even in Illy's book, they measured their dose out in grams. Okay, their coffee dose out in grams. Usually it was 7 grams for an Italian espresso. And then they measured the output, the beverage output, in milliliters. Okay. And as I said, that fellow Rene from New Zealand he turned me on to the idea of measuring the espresso, the beverage output in grams. Okay, and but back then there was this kind of crazy thing going on where people were going like, well, what kind of espresso shots do you pull? Oh, I pull double lungos, and someone else would say, oh, I pull only triple ristrettos, and all this kind of stuff. And I was kind of like, well, what is a triple ristretto? How many grams do you use for a triple ristretto? Oh, well, I use 24 grams. Oh, I use 20 grams. The Italians, when they do a ristretto, they use 7 grams. And it's kind of like, well, what's a ristretto? And some people did lungos, long shots. Oh, a long shot is I don't know, 60 milliliters or something like that. Well, how many grams of coffee do you use? And so it was kind of like a real poor, the communication about what you were doing. What's a ristretto and what's a lungo and what's a normale, if there's such a thing, or just what they call in the middle was just an espresso. What are people talking about? And it seemed like everybody could tell you what kind of shot they were pulling, but you had no idea what they were doing. Okay. And so it occurred to me that it should be a ratio. Okay. It should be the ratio of your output in grams compared to your coffee dose in grams. And I looked in Ely to try and see, them using that sort of ratio thing. And it wasn't there. I didn't, and nobody was talking about it. And I actually called up Don Holly, who was on the Specialty Coffee Association technical standards board, and I said, "Well, doesn't anybody talk about the ratios of of wet to dry when they're making espresso?" And he said, "No, I never heard that. I never heard that." So then I started talking about that on Home Barista about and to me that finally cut through all this confusion about what we were doing, because that's just a key part. You know that, John. It's a really key part of making espresso shot, is how much liquid you're going to pull out of how big a dose. And that before that, it seemed like that was buried in the Italian mythology, and there were these guys in Italy who could pull fantastic shots, but if you wanted to know how they did it, you were screwed, because you'd never be able to find out. Either they didn't want to tell you, or they couldn't really tell you. And so it's just another one of those things which I think baristas nowadays have access to, that kind of way of thinking, or that that knowledge that that didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I definitely remember you doing that post, and I feel like that's like foundational enough knowledge for me that I'm just like, yes, of course, like this is how you talk about it. But I guess like then the only thing you can do beyond that is talk about the actual strength percentages and stuff like that. Because I guess like 18 to 36 is different at 9 TDS than it is at 12 TDS. But yeah, that's I forgot about that post. That is, you consider that?
And once you had your brewing ratio, and you had a TDS measurement, which you would get with one of Vince's refractometers, then you could calculate the extraction yield, and then you could start to manipulate the flavor of your espresso. And until Vince started, I think this knowledge was out there, but I didn't have this knowledge. Once you started talking about extraction yields, and how to change them, then you could really start controlling, or at least influencing, the flavor of your espresso. Okay, that was a huge bit of knowledge that I got from Vince. Before that, my espresso tastes bitter. How come it tastes bitter? How come it tastes sour? How come it tastes hollow, or whatever? And I wasn't that talented a barista to figure that all out on my own. I just wasn't. Jim Schulman was more talented than me and figured out a lot of it, but not very many people did. And if you went online and tried to find somebody and asked the question, it was like you got a lot of answers that were not helpful, or a lot of people saying, "I just don't know." So yeah, things have really I don't know, things have changed. Things have gotten a lot easier, and I think the espresso has gotten a whole lot better.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. Before the refractometer became fairly common, were you ever the type of person that went as far as to like the whole like tedious dehydration of your spent grounds type thing, or were you lucky enough to not have ever done that?
I think Jim Schulman and I, we were doing experiments like that, and we were posting them on Home Barista. And I think Vince Fideli from VST, I think he read some of those posts, and that's how he contacted us about would we be interested in beta testing his refractometer. So I did very limited experiments, and it was a real pain in the ass, and it kind of stunk up your kitchen, because when you're dehydrating the coffee, the smells were pretty strong and stuff like that. So when the refractometer really proved out and was working well, it made things 100 times easier and more accurate. But there's been a lot of pushback on the refractometry, and I understand it, because you can't just say, well, my target is 19.5% extraction yield, and my espresso is going to taste good. It just doesn't work that way. It's a lot more complicated than that. But the extraction yield is a tremendous tool, in getting you going, at least getting you in the right direction to where you want to go, or figuring out if I change this or if I change that, what effect that have on my espresso.
Yeah, I remember talking to Scott Rayo about the whole dehydrating the spent grounds thing, and he basically told me this is a good way to do this if you don't want to buy a refractometer, but you will not have a girlfriend afterwards. So he doesn't
Right.
suggest it.
Yep.
Well, the last thing I'll ask about is your God shot video, and I'm just curious, was that a God shot? It was a great video.
You remind me of it. I had forgotten about that one. No, it wasn't. It was years and years ago. I saw on eBay a guy that was listed, like 4 dozen Italian espresso cups, all from different Italian cafes. So I bought it on eBay, and came. I don't know. There was one of them that was cracked. That I didn't want to use. So then I had the idea for that fake video where I tasted a shot, and then I had read about the God shot. I think that was David Schomer's thing, wasn't it? The God shot. I know Mark Prince talked about it. Mark Prince I think the original idea came from David Schomer, I think. But anyway, that a God shot was just so incredible that you were so astonished at tasting, at the first taste, you would lose control and drop the cup, and it would smash on the floor. And when I did that little video, it kind of, the cup was already cracked. So when it hit the tile floor, it broke nicely into several pieces, and the espresso dribbled onto the floor. So yeah, it was, I think that worked out pretty well. No, it wasn't a God shot.
I watched that video this morning, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. And I deduced that it must have been like you sacrificing an already sort of messed up cup. So I'm glad I was right.
It only took one take, and yeah, it just took one take. But I have no idea what it tasted like. And the tile floor was not damaged. Only the cup was damaged, fortunately.
Excellent. Good. I remember those days of people talking about God shots, and I guess those are
Yeah.
those were the days.
People would say, was that a God shot? Well, I don't know. I don't know. It probably wasn't God shot because it probably wasn't a very good shot. But yeah, God shots were big back then. The talk of the God shots were big back then.
Cool. Well, I think that's all I have to ask you. Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, I just think I just think that the whole coffee odyssey was just been a great deal of fun for me and satisfaction, and meeting a whole lot of really people that I still correspond with and I'm still happy to be friends with, and I appreciate your taking the time to do this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I very much appreciate all the posts that you did on all the forums, and they're very influential for me when I was still just somebody carrying around a digital scale in my backpack from class to class in college, and being that level of nerd. So for all the nerds in the coffee, I thank you.
Okay, well, from one nerd to another, you're most welcome. Okay, John.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me, Andy. It was good.
Okay, all right. Take care.
All right, adios.